I've clicked onto the Global Tropical Overview for November the 10th, 2023. As is always the case in these videos, with all express your mind alone, making decisions ahead of any tropical cyclones, look towards your local weather office, local emergency management, and local tropical cyclone warning center. So we're now into November, getting towards the middle part of the month. We've got about 20 days left of the Atlantic and East Pacific hurricane seasons, and things have calmed down quite a lot as they usually do this year, or this time of year rather. And you can see across the Atlantic, things are pretty quiet. Main reason being where you typically look this time of year in the Caribbean, we have very strong trade winds. You can see all these low-level cloud features streaming across your screen from the east to the west. And that's going to really just not favor too much tropical cyclonic formation over the coming days. However, we do have potential for development in the southern Caribbean as we go through this weekend, primarily into early and mid of next week. So what's going to happen is we're going to get an upper trough digging in across the Gulf Coast. You can see here, this is a GFS 200 millibar flow chart, and you can see this trough digging into the region. And it's important to look for, particularly during hurricane season, because these troughs can help to pull moisture north from the monsoon trough intertropical convergence zone. And that can, if the environment is favorable, support the potential for tropical cyclone formation. And you can see this here on the relative humidity plot. As the trough digs in, we have all this moisture coming in, streaming northwards out of the southern Caribbean. And we've got a general trough axis like this, where you have some westerly winds on the southern side near South America, and northerly winds, part of the trade winds in the Caribbean, closer to Jamaica and Hispaniola. And in this pattern, we're getting what appears to be a more broad area of low pressure to develop on these models. Primarily here on the European, you can see it better, this broad area of low pressure. And this system will likely have some chance to develop. The conditions appear to be favorable for some development. If I look again at the 200 millibar flow from the GFS, you can see we have anticyclonic flow aloft, and this is pretty favorable. But the issue is that this system is going to be broad, as I noted here. This is a very broad area of low pressure, and it may take a while for the system to consolidate. And we've seen cases before to where a system may be too broad that it just never consolidates. In fact, we had that, I think, last week or a couple weeks ago, where we had, I think it was Invest 97L, that had a high chance of development at a time, but it was so broad and it never got its surface center really going strong, and never really got it compact, and it just never developed before it came into Central America last week. Now, this is the National Hurricane Center tropical weather outlook over the next 7 days. You can see they're giving this about a 30% chance of development. That seems about right with what I'm seeing. The Canadian and European are definitely on the weaker side. You can see the European struggles to develop anything, and the CMC just has a broad area of low pressure. Now, the GFS is very bullish on this, and you'll see that it does develop a tropical cyclone and actually gets it pretty strong on this run. But have a word of caution here. This is the GFS. In the Caribbean, it can do a lot of odd things. It can have a lot of mysterious storm tracks, and it can a lot of times blow up storms to what degrees that they'll never get to. And keep in mind, this is mid to late not October, November. This is not common. It's certainly not impossible, but to have something like the GFS is showing here, it has been showing over several runs. I'll show you some of its other solutions. It just seems a bit unrealistic for this time of year, and right now I'd more so trust the European and CMC solution, a broad area of low pressure that might have a chance to develop into a weak tropical cyclone. The GFS as a good example with Invest 97L, it had consistently, before 97L had developed, continued to show it being a major hurricane on its runs before coming into Central America. But in reality, we had not even a tropical cyclone. It was just a broad area of low pressure. And especially when we get towards the development of this area of low pressure, as we get towards the latter part of the weekend and into early next week, I'd imagine we might start to see the GFS back off on these ideas of a very strong hurricane developing from it, similar to that of 97L. So just a word of caution there. If you're going to see a lot of these, a lot of these runs posted online, just make sure you remember the GFS has a bias to do this stuff. It does it all the time in the Caribbean, especially in the early and late season. So just keep that in mind. And if it does become more of a potential for something big to come through, you'll certainly hear about it from, a lot of reliable sources like the National Hurricane Center. And I'll, of course, have videos as well as we go in time. But regardless of the system developing, with all that moisture coming up north, you can get a lot of rainfall. I'll go to the rainfall forecast from the GFS. This is over the next 7 days, and you can see there's a lot of rainfall falling in portions of Central America and Jamaica. And of course, the track dictates exactly who gets how much amount of rain. Is it possible it comes a bit closer to Central America, we get a little bit more rain further inland? That is certainly a possibility. Or is it possible it just comes up to Hispaniola, Cuba, or Jamaica? Yes, it's possible as well. But bottom line being, the system has a chance to develop, again, 30% from the National Hurricane Center, and the main threat right now really is rainfall, as all that moisture gets picked up and brought over the region. The East Pacific is quiet, so we're going to skip over to the West Pacific for our next region. We're going to go here to the tropical West Pacific. This is a time of year where you start to look for some late season activity in the West Pacific. This time of year is notorious for having some of the more devastating super typhoons in history. We just had the 10-year anniversary of Super Typhoon Haiyan. I believe just a couple weeks ago, it was the anniversary of Super Typhoon Goni, and even in December, you can have strong storms. This year is going to be 2 years since Super Typhoon Rai came into the Philippines. Now, we don't have anything too big on the horizon. There's nothing really concerning saying we might have a super typhoon coming your way. That's the good news here, but there is some potential for some tropical cyclone development. What I'm showing you here is the zonal wind anomalies on the GFS, and the red colors here are showing westerly wind anomalies, so winds coming from the west and heading to the east, and the purples here are showing easterly anomalies, basically the opposite. And you can see that we have this westerly wind burst event taking shape, where we have anomalous westerly winds along the equator, and north of that, here near the Mariana Islands with the trade winds, we have easterly winds. And I've talked about this before, to where this is generally a cyclonic belt of background vorticity. And over time, this can support the development of tropical cyclones. And we are naturally seeing the potential for that on some of these model runs. The GFS run is out to middle next week, and you can see it has a tropical cyclone formed here near the Mariana Islands. And this generally forms from again, that westerly wind burst event, and then tracks up towards the region and intensifies a little bit into a stronger tropical storm or a typhoon on the model. But there is some issues with consistency here. The GFS has been consistent on the idea of something forming here. What it has not been consistent about is where it exactly develops. If I go back a few runs, you can see today it has been a little bit more consistent on the idea of something coming up towards the Mariana Islands. But as I go further back towards yesterday's runs, you'll see we had something else trying to develop south or just east of the southern Philippines. And there's a lot of variability here on exactly where this system may develop. You can also see this on the European model. Keep in mind the GFS is here, and if I go to the European, it's all the way over here with the system the GFS was developing yesterday. And we can look at some other runs from the European. It's also been flipping around on exactly where it develops a tropical cyclone here. So while there is, some decent chance here, it looks like, of a tropical cyclone developing, there's that uncertainty on exactly where the system will actually form. Now, this is a GFS ensemble plot, and you can see we have a significant spread here of tracks generally from the Mariana Islands down to the region where the European is developing that storm. And really, we just have to see how this plays out in time. I believe there is an invest from this. I believe it's 95W. I'm not sure if that's going to exactly be this system. I think it is, but I might be wrong, and there might be another invest by the time I release this video or tomorrow. But we'll just have to see exactly how the system develops from the westerly wind burst. So you can see as well in the European, it does appear to be a little more confident in this westerly formation here. And of course, if this does develop further west, we may have to talk about more impacts to the Philippines rather than the Mariana Islands. Now, again, the good news is we aren't really seeing too many signs that this could be a very strong storm. This is looking to be, at least right now, a tropical storm, maybe a typhoon right now. But this is very early in a tropical cyclone's life. Hopefully, it doesn't turn out to be anything too big, but of course, it's late season, and if environmental conditions are favorable, you certainly can get something to occur. So it's been seen several times in history. Now we're going to continue on this westerly wind burst topic as we go to the southern hemisphere, as we are in cyclone season now. The cyclone season started on November 1st in the South Pacific and Australian region. I believe in the Southwest Indian Ocean it starts in about 5 days on November the 15th. But we're primarily looking at the South Pacific here for development, as we have once again the westerly winds along the equator. And with the trade winds across the planet, you have some easterly winds down here by New Caledonia and Fiji, and this gives you a cyclonic belt of background vorticity here along the region. And this has been shown as well in models like the GFS and the European to support some chance of tropical cyclone development. You can see here on the GFS we have the potential for something developing here north west of Fiji, north of the Vanuatu Islands. Now, this track here seems to be a little bit more confident in it as well, the formation area. If I go to the European, you can see it also has a storm developing in the same general region as the GFS, so we have that little bit more confidence there. And we do have on both of these models this system becoming a tropical storm and coming towards the Fiji Islands there, and that could be an early season impact there. Not anything too strong, as keep in mind we are in the early season, and the sea surface temperatures are not overly warm as you go far south towards Fiji. We'll start to see greater chances, I'd say, for stronger storms as we get towards the latter half, or the mid part of the latter half of the season, as is usual as we head into the new year. But this could be your first taste of cyclone season, as I know Vanuatu had it with their first storm. I forget the name of it exactly, but that was a category 5 on the local scale. Not expecting a category 5 here. Looks like models are agreeing here on a tropical storm here. And this is the Fiji Meteorological Service tropical weather outlook. They're giving the system about a moderate chance of development early to mid next week. You can see Tuesday and Wednesday, a moderate chance outline there northwest of Fiji. So it's something to pay attention to if you're in the region. And I'll leave links to the Fiji Meteorological Service in the description below, so you can just skip ahead right to their website. All right, we're now going to move to the North Indian Ocean, as we have some potential for tropical cyclone development here. It sort of seems we're in a phase now of, we've had a bit of quiet, and now we're getting to an active period yet again. Feels like we're back to a few weeks ago, but fortunately a lot of these storms are not right now looking to be too strong, but there may be concern for this North Indian Ocean system. At least early signs are that this system could be in a fairly favorable environment as it comes north through the Bay of Bengal. And like I talked about last month when we had a Cyclone Hamoon, the time of year now is sort of the secondary peak of the North Indian Ocean cyclone season. We typically have two peaks, one in the late spring and one in the mid to late fall time. And we're still well within that peak. And we are seeing potential for development here in the Bay of Bengal. Now, what's going to happen here is we've got a little bit of a trough here across the Bay of Bengal. You can see some of the winds stretching across the Bay of Bengal here, creating this general belt of cyclonic flow, and this is going to aid in the development of an area of low pressure. You can see here on the GFS by the late part of the weekend and into early next week, we actually get a tropical cyclone developed on the model. This may be a little bit too quick on the GFS, but either way, it does look like chances are growing of tropical cyclone formation here. Now, the GFS is pretty bullish on this, and the GFS, like I said, with the Atlantic system, it does tend to go bullish with a lot of things. But there might be some reason here to believe that this could actually happen. First off, we need to look at the 200 millibar flow chart. This is from the GFS ensembles. And you can see that generally we actually have a pretty favorable environment. Not too strong of winds aloft directly over the system, and they're also uniform with where the storm is tracking. It's coming north, and the winds aloft are southerly. So that's uniform. But also this jet over portions of Asia. We have a very strong jet showing up in this model that could potentially aid a significant jet interaction here in the northern Bay of Bengal. And that may be your reason to say, okay, let's not completely ignore the GFS here on the potential for significant strengthening. Jet interactions this year have been very clearly showing that they can be very favorable for tropical cyclones, and they can help them intensify quite a bit. So it's just important that we don't completely discount something like this happening. Now, the European is much weaker. You can see it does still develop a system, but it's much weaker overall. And I can actually look, the 12Z package, it's not out yet, but I can go to the European 12Z package, and we can look at the 200 millibar flow, and you can see it also has this jet interaction in place. Now, the European can tend to go weaker with tropical cyclones. It does have a weak bias. So there may be the reason why the European is much weaker on this overall, on its runs. But for the Bay of Bengal, for those on the coastline of India, Bangladesh, and Myanmar, of course, right now we're not, say panic. It's just something to watch. Stay tuned to the Indian Meteorological Department, as they're going to have tropical weather outlooks. They have one each day, and they'll note any potential formation of a tropical cyclone. And I'll have future uploads on this. Hopefully this does not pan out to, a degree like the GFS is showing, but it does spark some concern to see the potential for a tropical cyclone to develop with such a favorable jet interaction on these model runs. It's just something you get a little bit weary of when you track these things a lot and see a lot of them, like especially this year. But hopefully this turns out to be one of the cases where the jet interaction is a bit less favorable than forecast. But as of right now, this looks pretty favorable on these models. And final thing, I'm just going to show you the GFS ensemble tracks. You can see there is a significant bubble here of tracks from the ensembles, showing that there is some significant potential of development, and I'll keep monitoring that for you all over the next several days. So that's all that I've got for today. It was a bit of a long one. There was a lot to talk about. The tropics are waking up once again, but that's all for now. Stay safe in all the areas mentioned that are going to be dealing with potential tropical cyclone formation over the next week, and happy November. And hopefully we can get away through the year without any more significant tropical cyclones. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching.